So step 6 is to start investing for retirement. And look, I know that in step 3 that we talked a little bit about investing at least up into that employer match, but now step 6 is really the opportunity for us to start ramping that up and really focusing on making as many contributions to your retirement accounts as you possibly can. Now, I would say that the standard for retirement investing, and really what we think, is that you should be investing at least 15% of your income into retirement. Now, keep in mind that this does not include any employer matches. You know, we really like to see those as the icing on the cake or a cherry on top, because if your employment situation changes or if your employer match changes, we don't want that to have to affect your plan. You should be able to keep chugging along, and if you get that, that's awesome, but it's not affecting you. Now, the reason we say at least 15% is because we want this to be a really good starting point, especially if you are earlier on in your career. Hitting that 15% and then focusing on some of your other goals can be a really awesome plan. But as you start to settle into your career, as you start to earn more income, we want to look at how can we increase this from 15, potentially up to 20, even 25% as you really start to settle into your career. Now, the question is, where do you actually invest this money inside of? Now, look, depending on your employment situation, you're probably going to have a few different retirement options in front of you. So here is the order that we recommend. First, of course, is taking advantage of that employer match if it's applicable to you. So let's say that your employer matches 5% of your income. Let's invest that first 5% inside of your 401k, really taking advantage of that free money. And then we are going to transition into a Roth IRA. Now, there are tons of arguments for why you might pick a Roth or a traditional. And honestly, you can make an argument for either case, but we like to lean towards the Roth IRA. So once you hit that employer match, you're transitioning into a Roth and focusing on maxing that out. Now, let's say you still haven't hit your 15% of your income. That's when we would transition back into a 401k if that's applicable to you. And this is really where most people are going to hit that minimum 15% going into their retirement. And if you don't, let's say that you make a really high income, or let's say that you wanted to go into that 25%, that's when we would move into a taxable brokerage account. Now, if you are someone who, let's say you're self-employed, or let's say that your job doesn't offer a 401k, then a taxable brokerage account is going to be another really great option after you've maxed out that Roth IRA. And look, I know that was a lot of information. And so just as a quick rule of thumb, if you're confused on which bucket you should be filling up first, just remember that match beats Roth beats traditional. So we really want to take advantage of that employer match if applicable to you. And then we want to focus on maxing out a Roth IRA and then going back into a 401k again, if you have one available to you. And then if we still need to invest more to hit that 15%, even 20, 25%, that's when we are looking at a taxable brokerage account. And again, we really want to drive this point home that the 15% should be a minimum standard to hit as you settle in, as you start to get more comfortable with your expenses, as life starts to ease up a bit. That's when we can look at adjusting it to 20 or 25% of your income.
Yeah, Nick, so question for you. A lot of people know that they should be investing, but get hung up on what to actually invest in. What do you recommend for people?
Yeah, another great question. And look, full transparency, Lauren and I are not investment professionals, so please take what we say as like a starting point for your research, but we do recommend always consulting with a professional on this. But, you know, the hope is that we can give you a good place to start your research at. And the first thing I would say is to look into a target date retirement fund. And so essentially, you know, what this is that you're going to look for a date around the year that you expect to retire. And that's the target date retirement fund that you would pick. So let's say that you're 30 years old today. Maybe you're looking at a 2055, even a 2060 target date retirement fund. And the way these work is that they are self-adjusting as you get closer to retirement. They're going to adjust your portfolio. So the further out you are, they're probably going to lean more into stocks, be a little bit riskier because, again, you can afford to take on that risk when you're younger. As you get closer, they're going to maybe move into bonds and some cash reserves. So that way your investment portfolio is not having these huge swings as you get closer to retirement age. They're really honestly just like a great place to start as like a set it and forget it type of fund. You just invest. You don't have to worry. It's going to self-adjust as you go. But the next best place that I would start to look at is something like an S&P 500 or even a total stock market index fund. And for those who aren't familiar, an S&P 500 index fund just tracks the top 500 or so companies in the US, and a total stock market index fund tracks about 3,000 different companies of different market caps, all within the US. And the great thing about these types of index funds is that they are self-adjusting. So if a company starts to do bad, it's just going to kick it out of the fund and replace it with a better one. You don't have to worry about any of that. but this does not round out a complete retirement portfolio. So that's one thing to really keep in mind. Again, as you are younger, you can probably heavily invest in this, but you also want to make sure you're investing in bonds. And then of course, as you get closer to retirement age, you have some cash reserves. So it's not a complete picture, but this is a really good place to start your investing research, I would say.
The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.